Hi everyone, welcome to Active Self-Protection Extra. John's Briefs today with Tim Forshee, as always, here at C2. Had a video on the channel not too long ago here from a wonderful private citizen stepping in and helping an officer in real distress on the side of the road, getting his butt whooped. And our private citizen really helped him. And I want to talk to Tim, though, about liability when you do that. At some point, do I take on, as a private citizen, if I choose to do this, do I take on some of the protections of the police, or am I on my own?
To win the fight after the fight, you need help. After a use of force, I trust Firearms Legal Protection to help me win the fight for the rest of my life. From their 24/7 attorney-answered hotline to coverage for the use of all legal tools, Firearms Legal Protection has you covered. Get a discount by signing up at the link below.
I don't know that we should think about this as the go, no go, Tim, because sometimes you just got to step in.
Sure.
You know, and I think, I think about our friend Thomas Yoxel, who is editing this video. I love you, Thomas. And recognizing that he stepped in and saved the life of Trooper Ed Anderson.
And Thomas has talked about this publicly before.
Yeah,
so
for sure. Talked about it here.
Absolutely. So I think we're okay telling you guys again about this story. So
and you know, it was a big thing here in the state of Arizona, and he saved the life of Trooper Ed Anderson, who was being literally murdered on the side of the road. Thomas couldn't abide by that. Stopped that guy, you know, shot him multiple times, and then sat there with Ed and tried to help him until the cavalry showed up. And I mean, as righteous and justified a shoot as could possibly be.
And it was treated as such as it should have been.
Oh, absolutely. And DPS treated him like a saint. He hangs out with cops here all the time. The dude couldn't buy himself a beer if he wanted to. And he's a good friend, and I love him dearly. And I think about this citizen here who stepped in Minnesota in the incident that we're talking about here.
Thank God it didn't prove to be as, you know, wasn't fatal. Thank goodness,
Thank goodness wasn't that nearly fatal. But I think there's something to talk about here, because when you do that, okay, well, I mean, I don't know necessarily how that officer is allowed to use force, because I'm not as versed in the law as he or she is. And we recently had one on the channel it was a guy who tried to help an officer and ended up choking a guy real good. And Daniel Penny is, as this is being recorded, literally in trial this week. I don't know how that one's going to go, because that guy died.
I'm praying for him
from that choke. And in that other case, the guy didn't die. But so that's my question, Tim. Is there, at some point, does it take on, if I've been, hey, officer, can I help you? Yes, I need help. All right, cool. Do I have any protections from that? Or?
Yes. Well, a lot of people talk about this nebulous concept of the Good Samaritan law. Have you heard that term before?
Of course.
I hear it all the time.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of people say, well, if I get a CCW permit, that means that I am required to step in and intervene in situations, because that makes me legally become a Good Samaritan. No, that's not what it means at all. Not at all. What it means in any sense, when we talk about the Good Samaritan law, what we're talking about is if somebody elects to become a Good Samaritan, we don't hold them to a higher standard. We hold them to the common man standard, the reasonable man standard. So for instance, my lovely wife is a physician, but she's a pediatrician. And this happened once, we're in a department store and a call went out, is there any doctors present? We've got a serious event in housewares or whatever. So my wife is inclined to try to help, as am I. So we ran over there. And if my wife decides to get involved with that, she's not held to the level of a cardiac surgeon. She's not held to the level of an emergency room surgeon. She's not held to the level of a pediatrician, because pediatricians don't treat cardiac events in 87-year-old people. She's held to the standard of a person who's trying to help, right? And so there's no malpractice issues there that wouldn't apply to anybody else. And that's kind of the Good Samaritan law, is that Good Samaritans are treated more with kid gloves than they might otherwise be treated. So here, this guy's not going to be held to the same standard as a police officer, because he's not a police officer.
Right.
So if the cop is severely injured, let's say Thomas hadn't killed that guy and was cuffing the guy who was still alive to await people to get there, and he put the cuffs on too tight. And that caused an injury to the guy's nerves, and it caused permanent damage to his hands. Thomas would not be held to the level of a police officer.
Because he isn't trained at the level of a police officer.
Exactly. And also, he elected to be a Good Samaritan with no duty to do so. So we hold him to that lower standard. So in that sense, this gentleman had some protections that a cop wouldn't have had.
Yeah. Because he doesn't have the training he had.
Correct. That's one of the main reasons behind that rule, yeah. But does he gain any of the umbrella protection from civil liability that the cop would have? I don't know off the top of my head the answer to that question, to be honest with you. I think that I would hope that he does, but again, he's choosing to act in concert with the cop, that doesn't make him a cop. That doesn't mean the 11th Amendment applies. It doesn't mean that the limitations on liability apply. So, but we see a case like this, thank goodness, where none of that should be really even part of the discussion.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
I guess the most alarming part of this video to me was the outcome, which was this guy wound up with probation only. He was going for wildly assaulted a police officer, went for the police officer's weapon,
and got probation.
Arguably, if the Good Samaritan had been there, he would have gotten the police officer's weapon and killed the police officer with that weapon. This is as close to a murder case as you're probably going to see. And the guy that did that winds up with no jail time whatsoever, probation only. I mean, and it happened in Minnesota. Was it in Hennepin County?
Yeah. So, I don't know about the county.
But the point being is that, I mean, I don't need to educate you guys about the liberal viewpoint of prosecution that we've had in this country for the last 5 years, and how it's really decimated the ranks of police officers, and how we've got a lot of people walking on the streets that sure as hell should not be walking on the streets. So, that's the most alarming part of this video to me. We saw a good person step in and do a good thing. The outcome was non-fatal. Thank goodness nobody was seriously injured that I could tell.
Yeah.
But holy cow, could this have spun really quickly the wrong direction. And you'd hope the prosecutor would get that.
And Tim has said this before, and I agree, that I think we have far less of a problem in America today with prosecuting good guys and a far greater problem with not prosecuting bad guys.
Yep. And that doesn't mean that when a good guy's prosecuted, I mean, this is my job. I make a living by trying to help people that I believe shouldn't have been
wrongly prosecuted.
They're out there, but I think in far greater numbers of the people walking the streets that the system had an absolute chance to keep off the streets, but they just keep recycling them back out there. I don't know why. I don't understand the motivations. I suppose it's political. It's above my pay grade, but it's distressing. Yeah.
And the other side of that too, I'm not so worried. I think people worry a lot about civil litigation in terms of self-defense, and we just don't see those cases show up.
And I think I explained, before in a prior video with you, Johnny, that the reason for that is because lawyers are greedy jerks, just like me. I mean, we work for money. And,
Adam Smith's invisible hand at work. There's no monetary reward in it.
If you do something intentionally, like self-defense or a crime, there is no insurance coverage. And if there's no insurance coverage, the only way I'm going to get money out of you is to go after your personal assets. And we see how that works with millionaires like O.J. Simpson, where the plaintiffs get $0 and 0 cents out of somebody who's got millions and millions and millions of dollars when the process starts. It's very easy to shield your assets from liability, and people do it. And so lawyers, I'm not going to work 2 years, spend 2,000 hours of my time and $200,000 of my money to put a case in front of a jury to get a meaningless 7-figure verdict that I will never collect a penny on. And juries know this. So you just don't see lawsuits for intentional torts. And a wrongful shooting, or a shooting that's alleged to be wrongful, is an individual personal tort. There's no insurance coverage, and there's not going to be any money there.
Well, and you do see it in police shootings.
Sure, but why? Because there's money.
There's money available, whether it's the city, the county, the state, the feds.
Yeah, exactly.
They've got money, and we know they've got money, and we know that there's the attorneys guided by, again, the invisible hand of self-interest that say, oh, hey, they're probably going to want to settle that rather than go all the way to court and have everything dragged through the mud.
Or if you say it instead of the grad school way, if you say it the junior high way, we're hoes. Lawyers are hoes. Let's just be honest about it. Hopefully, even some hoes have principles. Maybe I do, but let's be honest about it.
I mean, listen, again, as an attorney, you're not going to invest thousands of hours in something that's not likely to pay back to you, And so if you choose to step in under a Good Samaritan law, let's remember where the heart of the Good Samaritan law is to step in and help someone in need.
Be a Good Samaritan.
Right. And remember, that comes from the teaching of Jesus, right? So the teaching of Jesus was the reason that we call him a Good Samaritan is that the Jewish people hated Samaritans. The Samaritans didn't like the Jews. So when Jesus tells a story of the man who's a Jewish guy who's beat up on the roadside and left for dead because he was robbed, and the priest goes by and the Levite goes by and, I don't want to touch him. I don't want to help him. He might ritually defile me. But then the Samaritan, the hated one, the evil guy, the one who would never help, steps in, helps, gives of his own money and his own time at his own expense to help this guy. And then Jesus goes, who's his neighbor? And the guy goes, okay, I suppose that guy. And Jesus says, hey, go do that. So for me, as a person of faith, as a guy who tries to walk the way of Jesus, being a Good Samaritan is who I'm called to be.
Right.
Not because, I want to be a big deal in the community, but as a spiritual conviction, and that guides my ethical way. I'm going to have to step in as somebody who helps those.
And not to turn this into a preach session, guys, and that's not our intention at all. But one thing I see is, especially in big cities, we see videos that we get from New York. I've seen a couple of them where you see somebody getting the tar beat out of them, and you see
Nobody.
10 people standing around filming it with their phones, and which is usually sometimes how you get the video in the first place.
Yep.
And nobody steps in to help. They just watch this thing, and it astonishes me that we're that unfeeling and that we just don't have that moral compulsion to help others now. I mean, my gosh, when I was a kid, if I had not stopped somebody that was stopping changing a tire to offer to help them, the ghost of my father would have pierced my skull with a lightning bolt. I mean, it was ingrained into the very sense of who you are. You help others, right? And
we still see that in small communities in America.
Yep.
You know, when you go to a rural place, if you're driving down a rural road and you see somebody pull over on the side of the road, you pull over and check on them. Because there may not be somebody else come by for a couple hours.
That's right.
However, in a densely populated area, like an urban area, you go, well, somebody else's responsibility.
Or when people do step up, we see what's going on now with the subway.
Yeah, at the subway in the province,
Yeah.
Daniel Penny again, getting prosecuted as we speak, in trial. So I don't think you're going to have to worry about liability on that.
No.
All right. I think that liability is the last thing on your agenda. I do think competence should be a higher piece on your agenda. If you are, if you're in a walker, you probably shouldn't come, officer, can I help you? Yeah. It's probably not a good idea.
And one last thing I want to touch on too is that if you do step in as a third party, and that's what we're talking about. We're talking about third party defense. That's another way of phrasing being a good Samaritan. Make sure that you know what's going on, because I got bad news for you. You may have missed the first 40 minutes of the movie.
Right.
So, a cop's down. He's getting his head bashed in, which is what Thomas had to encounter. I think it's pretty clear you step in. But what if it's not a cop? What if it's just two people and somebody's on the bottom getting beat up and there's somebody on the top? So you're going to shoot the guy on the top? You're going to stab him? You're going to grab him by the throat and choke him out? I mean, because you just backed the wrong horse, turns out. It's just that your guy was on the bottom instead of the top, or on the top instead of the bottom. That's the thing that people forget about. When you intervene as a third party, you miss the first part of the movie. You might guess wrong who the villain is. So don't forget that.
So be careful.
Yep. You're buying what you pay for there, so be careful.
Be careful. And I think in those cases, you see somebody beating a child to death.
Pretty clear cut.
Pretty clear cut.
Yep.
You see, again, somebody murdering a police officer on the side of the road. Pretty clear cut, right? Even if you don't like cops, pretty clear cut, because that's not like they're going to let that guy get away. Right. And when the next group of cops show up, they're bringing an ass kicking with them, as Chris Rock famously said.
The piñata party is about to arrive.
Yeah. And so there are some clear cut ones. The ones that aren't so clear cut, I want you to be a little bit more cautious.
Yep.
Hey, thanks for the info, man.
Always, buddy. Always. Thanks.